Ever wonder what happens to your marketing dollars when you can't trace the impact? You're seeing pipeline activity, but no one can actually tell you where that's coming from. Does that sound familiar? Welcome to the world of dark channel attribution. It's where your customers interact with your brand through untrackable channels. And today I'm going to show you 3 real ways that you can actually track these dark channels and get some data around what type of business it's driving for you. Hey everyone, I'm Saavedra from MergeYourdData, and we are on day 37 of the 90-day YouTube sprint on signal analytics. And today we're talking about a very hot topic, which is attribution, and specifically how we're going to measure dark attribution channels. If you think about channels that are difficult to measure, difficult to track, we're talking about in-person type things, whether it's events that you host, conferences that you go to, billboards that you pay for, direct mailers that you send out, referrals, all of these dark channels. There's actually ways that you can measure this. And we're going to talk about some of those ways in this video here. And we're going to go into some old school ways that this was done and how we actually do it for a lot of our clients. Obviously depends on their own business and their own marketing approach, but these are not foolproof, but they are ways to get more data than you ever would have had on these channels. And so we're going to go into that. And how we like to start out these videos now is by sharing why this matters and how it relates back to the work that we're actually doing. And so we had a client that had brought us on board. They had these attribution or these channels that were difficult to attribute. We're talking about mailers, we're talking about billboards and referrals, and the mailers were their main lead source, right? And they were having trouble understanding if people were going directly to their website or if they were coming directly from the mailer. And so if you are someone who specializes in these mailers, you probably already know a lot about this video, so it might not be worth it to watch. But we're going to dive into how exactly we're going to track this and track these other channels that are dark and get some actual attribution data around it. And so when we were able to understand with this client exactly which mailers to which demographics were performing, they were able to ratchet up those campaigns and heavily target across the country which people they were sending out those mailers to, the messaging that worked, and how to get them to move through the customer lifecycle and become customers. And so that's why this topic is relevant. It's why we're talking about it today. And so you actually might be at a different point right now. You might not even know that this gap occurs. You might just be relying on attribution tools that exist, either Google Analytics, either directly inside of your marketing automation tools or your CRM. You might just think that that's all accurate, right? And so that actually isn't the case. There are these channels where it's difficult to tell where they're truly coming from in the customer journey. Just because someone came direct to your website doesn't mean that that's actually where they heard of you from. It's not just SEO. It's not just organic search, right? Sometimes you can track that type of attribution. Sometimes you can't, especially with all the changing laws and platforms today. It's getting more and more difficult to accurately track where people are coming into your website from. Or they might be calling a phone number. But if you're only using one phone number, it's difficult to track. So you might not even know that this gap occurs, but it does. There are holes in your attribution data, and it's why we're talking about these dark channels. 2, living with the shortcomings of this fact. If you already know about it, then you might just be accepting that you can't measure it. The only thing you might be able to tell is that when you turn a certain campaign off, results stop flowing in. And so you're just living with the shortcomings of knowing exactly where people are coming from. You just don't turn anything off and you keep spending more and more. Obviously, this makes it difficult to scale and causes negative implications on your business unit economics as a whole. 3, spending all your resources trying to solve it. This is the other thing that we've seen people doing. They're hiring people to build out these insane attribution systems where they're paying a lot of money for these attribution tools that in reality are not giving them a full picture when they think they are actually getting a full picture. And so you can sink a lot of resources into this type of problem trying to solve it. And in reality, it's not actually getting you any further than if you didn't have it at all. And so you might just be feeling in general like this. You're running in the same place. Nothing's changing. Your data says one thing, but you can't really see any progress in terms of knowing where people came from, knowing what you have to scale, knowing what works. And so one way to get around this is signals, but specifically why signals are relevant in this conversation is the attribution portion of signals. And so we created this diagram here that shows that signals is a combination of attribution, unit economics, dimensional data, conversion optimization, and attribution is a big part of it here, right? And so we're already measuring conversion optimization. This is the assumptions here. We already have some dimensional data of the people coming in and the people that we're sending these campaigns to from the direct mailer standpoint. Obviously, if we're doing billboards, it's another story, or some other similar channel. And then we have the unit economics as well. So this is the actual financial performance of these signals, how it's relating to conversions, how it ties back to the channels that they're coming from, what those people and firms look like. And so why are signals relevant in this discussion about measuring dark attribution channels? And because of the diagram we showed where attribution is just one part of 4 different components that go into signals, we can do some specific things with attribution that we know isn't accurate or isn't whole and still get a strong signal of how that's performing for your company. So signals don't only focus on attributed touch points. When we're relying only on attribution, we have an incomplete picture, but we're thinking of it in a way that we have a complete picture. And that's just not the case. We think that it's 100% accurate, but it's not 100% accurate. And so depending on the rate of error of those attribution data points, you could have a completely misleading conclusion based off of your attribution data. And so signals don't only focus on the attribution touch points. We can downweigh those attribution components of a signal and focus on other data points that we have to construct a signal that actually means something. We can still have the attribution in there, but we can just not pay as much attention to it. 2, if you're missing certain data points, other data will still fill the gap. So like I just said, we can not focus as much on the attribution component of it and look for instead other data points that we can use to determine signals of whether or not someone is going to become a prospect, whether they're going to become a customer, how effective our marketing and how effective our sales actually is. So now we're going to get into the actual meat of what I promised here, which is how you're going to measure dark attribution channels. And you're going to do 3 things, and we're going to go into 3 specific examples of point number 2 here. But first, like I said, use signals and keep this attribution gap in mind. So you downweight the attribution component of your signals. You don't rely as heavily on it, but you can still use it as a portion of your signal to tie it back to revenue performance, right? If you have a lot of people going to direct or unattributed, you can understand that these people might be coming from other marketing campaigns that you can't directly measure. And so you can still weigh it in a specific way based off of not only where the attribution tools are telling you that it came from, but you can also combine it with behavioral type data to come up with an actual signal of whether or not that person is going to convert. So you combine it with the behavioral data, you have the attribution data, you can do demographic and firmographic data, and then you can compare that to historical conversion rates and historical financial performance, the unit economics of people who came from that specific attribution channel and met the other data point criteria. And so you can still use signals to go around even measuring these dark attribution channels. And so it'd be more of a lift type of methodology. You're measuring the actual lift of when a campaign is turned on and how your revenue, leads, funnels react to that. 2, you can use the direct response methodology to close this gap as best as possible. For our client that we gave in the example, this is what we did. It gives us more data points to work with. It's still not 100% complete, but it gives you much better data. And so as long as we're keeping number 1 in mind, we can use number 2 here for various channels. 3, rely more heavily on self-attribution data via form fills or meeting content. And so this one is also very powerful. If you collect self-attribution data, how did you hear about us? Have you heard about our podcast? Have you seen a billboard on your way to work? Those types of questions. Then you can actually still collect that data and get a more complete picture attribution wise. So you can do it via form fills or in meeting content. And so if you are meeting with these prospects and you have people who are good at having discussions and walking people through their journey to come to your brand, then you can actually capture in check boxes. Have they heard about this campaign or that campaign? Did they see this channel? And then you can get a more complete picture of whether or not people are paying attention. And we do this ourselves. We ask about the YouTube videos, right? We've gone over it in the 30-day review that we have people who mention that our YouTube videos were a main factor in coming to our website. And so they were self-attributing our YouTube channel as a way that they are actually, or a reason why they're actually doing business with us and why they know about us in the first place. And we would have never seen this from an attribution tool. But let's go back to 2, use the direct response methodology to close the gap as best as possible. That's the next slide here. So these are things that have been around for a long time, but a lot of companies don't do these correctly or they don't know about them. And so with our client example, they were using direct mailers, but they were just sending generalized pieces of content that showed their brand and then sent them either to a direct or their homepage or to their general phone number for sales, right? And so they were getting results. People were calling, but they didn't know where they were coming from specifically. And so what we did is set up this type of situation. So all 3 of these things, and this is specifically for direct mailers, but you can use them in other channels as well. 1, we use dedicated phone numbers on specific channels and campaigns. There are companies and tools that do this at scale where you can have very targeted phone numbers, unique phone numbers go out for specific campaigns and specific channels. And so then if people are calling that phone number, they're coming directly through that specific campaign and that channel. Now, it's not going to capture everyone, especially if you're combining your brand with it. Some people will instead Google your brand, go to your website, fill out a form or call, right? So you're not going to capture everything, but a lot of people do take that easiest next step. And so using that concept, we also have 2 and 3 here. Use dedicated URLs that are landing pages or pass-through URLs, and then use discount codes on specific channels and campaigns. So once again, these things are scalable with certain tools and certain agencies that will do this. Number 2 is really, really unique. I'm going to take that back. It's not really, really unique, but it can actually be done natively inside of the CRM and pretty quickly at scale. And so you can use dedicated URLs that are printed on your mailers, sent out to specific people, has certain UTMs on them. You can go pretty far with this. And then it sends them to specific landing pages, or it passes them through certain URLs. So then you know exactly where they're coming from, even if browsers are stripping the UTMs. Now, the issue with this is it can be pretty difficult to scale with the landing pages portion or the pass-through URLs, but it is the foolproof way to do this. So for example, you can even do this on billboards. For a billboard, you have a specific URL that's not your company URL that people can type in, and then it redirects them to your business. Or it just has your business's logo and branding and landing page for that specific URL so that you're not passing them to a URL that they don't recognize, because then people are like, what's happening, right? So for example, MergeYourdData, if we ran a billboard, we could have a specific URL that says cleanupmydata.com, and people can go to that page instead. And I know that they saw that billboard and went to cleanupmydata.com. I wouldn't have my logo on the billboard. It would just be a problem that would be solved. And then they would go specifically to that URL. And so that's one way that we can measure directly these dark attribution channels. We just have to be a little bit smarter with the setup, right? And so just remember that the shortcomings are still there. We still have some gaps. We still don't have 100% accurate customer journey, never will. But if you include brand logos in your creatives, a good number of people will still go direct to your general website. You see this all the time. It'll reduce, but you'll still have a good chunk. If you don't include brand, you're losing opportunity to increase recognition and familiarity. That's a downside to not including your logo. You're paying money to get eyeballs, and then you're only focusing on people who are actually converting if you measure it without a brand, or if you measure it and don't put your brand on your messaging. And then resources are required to set up all this tracking: time, money, third-party tools, and firms. We go back to the unit economics. Is it actually worth it? If you're operating at a certain scale, it definitely could be. If you're a small company with a small budget, none of this is worth it. Pretty simple. If you have one billboard out, doesn't take much time to set up the tracking this way, might be worth it. But if you are a small company not doing a lot of revenue and you're trying to send out 500 different targeted campaigns to people, it's going to be very difficult to get a good ROI on that. It's something to keep in mind. So real client results here, winning more with the same or less opportunities. And this is just showing that once you deploy this type of methodology, these signal analytics, you can understand your customer better. You can know which campaigns are more effective at bringing people in. You can cut funding for the other campaigns and focus solely on those. And here you can see on the right-hand side, these are the total number of deals, which are increasing, but not at a super high rate. And then you see over here that the number of won deals rapidly increases to where they're closing a very high number of deals. And so this is what the power of signal analytics is. It's what can be combined with this attribution type data, right? Part of signals are attribution data points. And so when you combine those two things, you can get these types of results. And so I ask you, take one action, share in a company chat if you think this was useful. Next videos, it'll be a surprise. Subscribe on YouTube or via the link in the description. If you subscribe via the link in the description, you get our free signal constructor tool that helps you map out the exact signals and the actions that your team needs to take so you have that game plan going forward. I'm Dan Saavedra from MergeYourdData. Thanks for watching.